I don't even think I really, like, I never really eat anything else. Like, I'm so, I eat biscuits, I work at Hardy, so I eat biscuits all the time. So I don't want a biscuit, so I just eat chicken sandwich.
And you want like 2 years I've eaten their chicken like this. It's pretty crazy.
At Bojangles?
Yeah, like their actual chicken. Like I make it and I'm around it every day, but I've eaten it like
You mean like fried chicken, like the bone? Well, I don't eat bone chicken anyway.
I haven't eaten like half their menu. It's pretty ridiculous.
I'm sorry, I bet everything orders.
Don't do that.
Not magazine? Yes. Why?
One time I needed to be in your office when you're supposed to be there, you was not there.
Well, afterwards.
No, it's not for me.
It's okay.
Alright, okay, so remember, you're gonna get a grade for each class for your discussion. And also presenter will get a grade. Okay, so I posted grades for the last class on the Blackboard. You have seen it, right? Okay, so every class counts. Okay, so speak.
Okay, so this week, our research topic was the pension crisis currently happening throughout the U.S. So the one thing I noticed when reading this was, yeah, that's what I'm going to. Okay. So when I was reading it, like I was thinking in terms. So think of it in terms of college, like sitting here, like deciding which college that we're going to. That was a huge decision, and one that a lot of thought went into. And a lot of the problems that we're running in with the younger crowd today is that they're not putting equally as much thought into retirement and what comes after all of this work in school and such. So a pension is a plan set up by a private company or state or local government, and that plan is a system where the employee will put in a certain amount of money each month, and your company or state or local government will put in a set amount as well towards your retirement. And so the problem that we were running into, let me start this.
Oh, and you have public sectors and you have private sectors. So your public sector is like your that's the government type jobs. Well, state and local government type jobs, and then your private sector is like, of course, your private companies. Okay, so it just depends on who you work for. And we're going to talk about how pension relates to both of those because they both have different plans.
So the public sector, which would be state or government jobs, that is where the government is paying for your pension plans via the taxpayer or revenue that is generated by state or local government programs, in addition to the amount that you put in. So at the end of your work time, when you come to retire, the money that you collect will be from taxpayers, government programs, and whatever you put in. The private sector, on the other hand, you put in a set amount, but a private company is responsible for putting a amount into a pension fund. And the way they get that money is investments. So they will invest money into other ventures, and they're supposed to put a amount from those investments into a pension fund. And the problem that we run into is that a lot of companies will when determining pension plans, they have a set rate of return, meaning that when they invest, they decide, okay, maybe we're gonna get 8% of we're gonna get we're gonna get a increase of 8% back. And so based on that 8% rate of return, they're deciding how much money they're going to put into the pension investment account. Well, the problem is that rate of return is not.
It's not guaranteed.
Yeah, it's not guaranteed, and a lot of the times it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So, and because of that, we've run into a problem. And so that problem is in the form of a $1 trillion gap. There is a $1 trillion gap between how much we can pay for and how much
Is
we have
promised.
promised.
So they don't really account on the economy changing, like the stock market, it changes every day. So if we were to have a crash, they don't really account for that stuff. So they're telling you, okay, you're going to get back X, Y, and Z for your pension. But the truth is, they really can only cover maybe X and maybe X and Y, but they can't do all that they're saying they can. And so they're just kind of hoping that it'll work out for the best. But of course, we all know that sometimes that's not the way it happens.
So in the beginning, so before pension plans even existed, the form of retirement was, of course, having children. You have lots of children, there's a better guarantee that one of them will be able to take care of you when the time comes that you can't work anymore. Then the government decided to step into the game, and that's where pension plans came from. And with these pension plans, they're promising benefits, lots of benefits. So, and those include like health care. So when you're retired, you can go to the hospital and it'll be paid for. In the public sector, they offer something that's called a public safety bonus. And so that would be the best case. My mom works in the prison system. And so when she retires, she would be able to collect a public safety bonus because she worked in a hostile environment. So, and so that's like the types of things that they're promising. And a lot of the times when companies and governments set up these pension plans, an example would be when they set up these pension plans during the technology boom. So the economy is doing great and they set up these pension plans with lots of benefits, and because the economy is doing great, they're expecting their rate of return to be increased. So therefore, theoretically, they would be able to put more of an investment into their pension plan accounts. Well, the economy is not a stable venture, and the technology boom, for example, didn't continue on the rate that it was at. So now you have these benefits that were born from a economic boom, but can no longer be sustained.
Okay, and the percentage of final year salary that was also listed up there on the benefits. Some employees, not all, but sometimes what they do to calculate your benefit is look at your last year that you worked, look at that salary, and take a percentage of that, and figure out what your max benefit's going to be. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, and telling you other ways that they calculate your benefit. Because I did some research on the NC pension plan and our pension debt and what's going to happen to us.
Okay, so like I said, currently the pension crisis, the number attached to it, it hovers around 1 trillion. And what was so surprising to me is what they stated in actually one of the articles was that only 4 of our 50 states have fully funded pension plans. So that would be saying if everyone in their workforce were to retire today and start collecting their pensions, only 4 states would be able to give those pensions. And so we said like one of the biggest problems with this crisis is that companies are expecting a larger rate of return that is theoretically possible. And so a lot of times they realize too late, well, wow, we can't actually do this, like it's not possible. So one example, so private companies, they tend to just be like, well, we can't do anything about it. So one example is General Motors. We all know like recently they had their own crisis. Well, what happened with that company is they had they were supposed to be setting aside a certain amount for their pension accounts with their investments. Well, they weren't, they were setting aside the bare minimum. It was technically what they were supposed to be, but it was the bare minimum. Well, the problem is when their the cars, when they realized that they could not pay for these pensions, they increased the price of their cars that they were making. And that, as we talked about before, the competition had a substitute that consumers were willing to accept. So therefore, the company, the General Motors, suffered. And so because of that, the company went down, they weren't able to pay their pensions, and they went to the government and they said, well, we can't do this, can you help us out? And that's another problem, because as you know, our government did help them out, and they bailed them out, and they gave them money to, one, pump into their pension plans, and two, pump into their cars. But the thing is now, the US government is accepting that responsibility. And that responsibility then gets pushed off to the taxpayers.
Right, and we don't want to tax them to death because we've seen what happened, in the past with the whole American Revolution and thing like that. So so we have to be careful the way we tax taxpayers, and these funds that she's talking about that they can't pay for, those are unfunded liabilities. You should have saw that vocab word in the reading last night. Unfunded liabilities. That's what's going on here.
So when the private companies don't go to the government and say, hey, we can't do this, another route is to file for bankruptcy. But the thing with bankruptcy is when a company files for bankruptcy and they have these unfunded liabilities, the pension plans that they can't pay for, then two things happen. One is that retirees just have to take a cut. So per every dollar, they're accepting less, so not getting the full benefits that they were promised. And then two, bankruptcy allows for companies to renegotiate future pension plans. So that's what a lot of private companies are doing. But that's why you'll see that in the future, like when we're going out and going to get jobs, that there's going to be a lot less benefits available to us because of all the benefits that were promised to the future generations. Okay, so the fix is not really a fix at all. So as I said before, the taxpayers are being expected to pay for a lot of this. But a few other routes are, in terms of the government run plans, governments are attempting to slash spending. So they're gonna cut down on government run programs, cut the pensions, not now because those ones are locked in, but future ones, as I stated. But another route that not a lot of people have thought about is just choosing better investments. So, and this especially could be good for private companies, but also the government. So right now, one of the articles that you guys were supposed to read talked about our lack of investments in infrastructure. So right now, the infrastructure gap is also at about 1 trillion. We are spending about 2.7 trillion on infrastructure when we should be spending about 3.7. Well, if you look at the two, if you look at governments, so if the government spent more money on infrastructure and was able to bring that up to where it is supposed to be, that produces a better source of continuous revenue that could be used to help our other crisis with the pensions. This is harder with private companies because private companies are given a lot of responsibility in terms of what they choose to invest in and things like that. So this is one route for them. Whether or not they choose to take it is questionable.
Okay, so before we start our question, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the NC pension crisis and what's going on with our state alone. So I found this in an article that I read, and it said that as of 2010, we are in $2.8 billion in debt into the unfunded liabilities. So they've promised out that much money, but we don't have that to give. Okay? So taxpayers' money estimated to total more than 800 million this year, and it's going to grow past 1 million in the next 5 years. And this article is as of 2012. So we haven't hit that 5-year mark yet, but we're not too far. I mean, we are in 2015. So the average payout to NC retirees is 66% higher than the national average retirement income for private sector retirees. So that goes back to the whole, are you a public sector employee or are you going to be a private sector employee? I mean, it's kind of a gamble there, but I mean.
And some things that you would think are public could in terms be private. So if you want to be a nurse and you're working at a hospital, you would think hospital government run, but that's not always true. A lot of hospitals are actually privately owned. So, and that's one thing you should look into when you're going to look for a job. That's one of the things that people look at, because when you're privately owned, private owned companies tend to give a lot less benefits, because the investments that the money that they're using to pay for these pension plans comes out from their own pocket, versus the government, the money that they're using is just it's revenue, or they could tax the taxpayer.
Which essentially that comes out of your pocket too, but the public sector is backed by the government. Okay, so only 20% of private sector retirees have the same type of retirement plan. So again, there's more pros and cons. And tens of thousands of retirees will begin to draw pension benefits in the next decade. And on top, not only are people getting older, but they're living longer. So now, not only are we about to start having to pay out a lot of money to people who are retiring, but these people, we're going to have to continue to pay out to them because they're going to live longer. And they're going to be around more. And we're going to have to figure out, where's this money going to come from? What are we going to do to solve the debt we're in? Do we tax the taxpayers? Do we look at infrastructure, like one of the articles had said? You know, what are we going to do as far as that? So,
I have a question. So what's that 66%? And what is that 20%? Can you repeat that?
It says average payout to NC retirees is 66% higher than the national average retirement income for private sector retirees.
Okay, that 20%?
And the 20% is the private sector retirees have the same type of retirement plan that public sector employees have. So, I mean, it's different, and they have less. Okay. So if you look, you can just Google this and a site will come up. But if you go to NC Retirement, they actually have a website where it tells you what you should be doing at the age that you're at as far as retirement and pension is concerned. So for ages 29 and younger, so that would be us, they want you to start developing a budget and think about ways to invest and grow your savings. And so we read in the chapter that can sometimes be risky, you know, investing in something, especially if you don't get back what you thought you were going to, and so you end up losing money instead. But these are just things to think about. And if you fall in the ages 30 to 39, they want you to start setting and achieving short and long-term goals as far as money's concerned. So around this time, you know, you're probably about to buy a house, have a family, things like that. And so if you're 40 to 54, you know, you're approaching retirement. And so they want you to seriously start looking at retirement. What are your benefits? And they say don't forget about your settings and assets, because you have to, you know, put those into the equation too. And so as you become 55 and older, and now it is that time, you need to know your benefits, but you also need to remember Social Security. We're not going to talk about that in this chapter, but it is still important and something to think about. And you have to assess your personal situation. So you have to think, you know, what's going to fit you, what are they going to be able to benefit you from.
And the thing is, like, this is where a lot of people run into issues. They been smart and they're thinking about the plan of saving for the future. But if you are accustomed to a certain type of lifestyle now, don't think 50 years from now when you're retiring, you're all of a sudden gonna be living a very different and maybe cheaper lifestyle, because that's just not gonna happen. Some people will be living a luxurious lifestyle now and think, oh, well, when I'm retired, like, it'll be cheaper, and then they don't save enough. So the level at which you save is also important.
So saving and planning is really important when it comes to pension. Obviously, you can see that people really weren't doing that in the past, and that's why we have unfunded liabilities. But this past June, President Obama signed a law that's going to go into effect January of 2016, and it's called Defending Public Safety Employees Retirement Act. And what it is that it allows retired federal law enforcement officers and firefighters, so here we go, kind of back to that public sector thing, over the age of 50 with 20 years of service to withdraw money from their retirement funds without a tax penalty. And what that tax penalty is it comes from when you draw early from your retirement funds, you get a 10% tax penalty from drawing from that fund. But these people won't have to do that if they'll just wait to retire next year. They won't even have a penalty, as long as, like they're 50, 20 years of service, whatever. And normally if you are going to draw early from a retirement fund, you have to be 59 and a half years old. It said a half, 59 and a half years old before you can withdraw without a tax penalty. So that's more money that I guess you could say that's going to be taken out, because now they're not having a tax penalty on it. And if you go to NC Retirement, you'll see how they figure your maximum benefit. So with people like, let me see, can we pull that up?
Which one?
The NC Retirement thing. And I'll show you guys how they calculate pension benefit. So you can just, it's not typing anything.
Oh, okay.
You can just, you just Google NC Retirement.
You can try that. And then one question I had for you guys, it's not necessarily in the book, but I talked about like what the old system was for people in retirement, and now we're talking about the government getting involved. So what are your views on, like, do you think the government should be involved, or do you think there's a benefit to that?
I think the government should be involved because it keeps it regulated, and so it helps like make sure everyone gets a retirement fund, which I mean, you kind of need that because you can't work your whole life. So I think the government helps keep everything regulated.
Yeah, I definitely think that back like more than a few years ago, like when you could rely on like your family members to provide for you, that encourages more. It would encourage you to have more kids, and that the hope is that one of your kids would be able to support you. Well, that's not in the world we live in anymore.
Yeah.
So because we're not trying to say produce kids, especially with like everything that I guess the resources and stuff like that. So I'm saying more of like we live in a self-reliant kind of world. So we need the government rather than a family member to.
So
provide
today
for you.
versus before, the demand for the government involvement has increased, but like Sierra, you said so that like everyone can get a pension. Like the way it's set now, that might not be the case.
I think the government should run it, but they need to do a better job of running it.
Okay.
Because the public sector, they don't have the budget for the pensions they're promising now. They need to reassess, and I know it talks about how there's problems because they can't change what they've promised already. So this is gonna take effect like when we retire now. But they need to promise realistic pensions and deal with where we are now, not promise these huge pensions that they can't pay for, and
Yeah.
I think overall, like, since the government kind of has to intervene, like, I think that's the better course of action, but I don't think the government should intervene as much, especially considering, like, the company probably could have done something.
Well,
I mean, I don't really know the.
Well, because there's two sides. Like, if you look at the government side of pensions, they're relying too heavily on taxpayers. And if you look at the private sector, they're relying too heavily on an unrealistic rate of return. So, ideally, like, if they fix, each side fixes their problems, like, that would create an equal balance. But, so the general consensus I'm getting is that government involvement is good. So you guys, are you saying you don't think that Americans would be able to do it on their own?
I think it would be it wouldn't be impossible. I mean, some people really do save up for retirement, but a lot of people just can't afford, like the people that live paycheck to paycheck. It would be extremely hard for them to find a way to save money out of like paying all their bills for retirement. So I definitely think there needs to be something set up to help with that, because I mean, I know a ton of people that like after they pay their bills, they have nothing left. So
that morality has changed like over the years. Like back in the 60s and 70s, like you had like your parents move in whenever they got older and you took care of them, whereas today you don't see that as often. You see older people, you'll go to say a fast food restaurant and you'll see them working because they have no one that'll take care of them and they don't have enough money set aside.
I think, like, I agree with what she said, how people live paycheck to paycheck, but I mean, everyone could save a little bit to make it work. But I honestly don't think people would take the time to save their money. A lot of people like to spend everything they have. A lot of people even have like huge credit bills because they spend money they don't even have.
So now it's kind of like, by the government stepping in, you're dealing with something that could potentially be a bigger problem. Because if they didn't step in, imagine how many old people we would have who need help, and then we've all got to shell it out all at one time, versus just set up one plan.
So I'm confused about how we're talking about the government stepping in. Are we talking about like the where they help the private sector, or are we talking about like the Social Security?
In terms, well, because if you have a government job, then it's both sides. Because if you have a government job, you put in some, and the government puts in some.
The government's your employer.
The government is your employer. So if you have a private sector job, it's a private company, and you're putting in some, and they're supposed to put in some from investments. And so, but if those don't exist, it is entirely up to you to take that money out of your check every month. And if it's entirely up to you, you have to understand that that means you don't have anyone also putting in some. So you take out more.
So you're talking about not necessarily the government, but just the employer. So whether that's
Just
the
the
state
employer,
government
yeah.
or the private. Okay.
Well, okay. So now we're gonna discuss, before we get to our questions, how exactly do they figure how much you're gonna get each month for your pension. So this is the handbooks, which can be found online, and this one is for the teachers and state employees, and it's also for local government employees. Okay, so what they do is they add your salary during your four highest paid years, so that's what they do there. And they take an average of that, and they multiply it by a percentage. I'm not sure how they get this percentage, but they multiply it by a percentage, and they determine how many years you worked. So that's important too. And then they're going to multiply it by that number, and then they divide that by 12, and you divide it by 12 so that you can get a monthly allowance. And this is your max value. Like, you can't get any more than that.
Can you go through that calculation there? I lost in the second or third step there. Okay, so the
Here.
first step I got it is 4 years of income, right?
Your highest paid year.
And then add it up. And then the second one is
They divide it by 4, so they get an average of
the
it.
average. Then okay, that's step 2, and step 3. They multiply that by 18%. No,
1.8.
1.8. 1.8%. So then okay, so
I've seen the 1.8 on a lot of things, so I think that's just the flat rate that they apply, whether you're in a government or private.
so let's go to step 4.
Uh-huh.
Step 4 is
The years of your years of service.
year of service.
So
Okay.
then they take this number that was multiplied by the percentage, multiply it by your years of service, and then you get an annual retirement benefit. But then you're going to divide that by 12, because we have 12 months in a year, and you're going to get your monthly allowance, okay? So this is the check you're going to get from the government if you're a teacher, a state employee, or a local government employee. This is how they do theirs. Now,
Is that 1.82% applies to all state employees?
State, yeah.
All state employees.
Yeah.
And
Say
it may like range, like North Carolina may have a different one than
no,
Connecticut.
this is North Carolina.
Oh, this is North Carolina. Okay, so the 1.82% is in North Carolina, but Connecticut could have a 1.53%, and so that's where it varies.
Yeah.
But the almost $19,000, that's how much you would be getting per
Wow.
year, and then the 1,500 is the amount that you get every month.
Right. And I did North Carolina because, excuse me, because this applies to most of us. So I researched our own state and to figure what you'll be looking at or what you'll start thinking about, you know, in a few years down the road when you actually get a career and then you start thinking about that retirement plan. So it just depends on what kind of employee you are. So this next one is for legislative retirement system. So if you're one of those employees, and what they do,
So what would that be?
what would that be?
Yeah, like practical.
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, they have it in here.
Well, the legislative branch.
Because that seems like a really low salary for.
Well, you think about it. This is retirement while they're working.
No, but it said their highest annual salary.
Oh, okay.
It was like 20,000. I just expected it to be higher.
I think these are all pretty low because I know some teachers right now that make like 60 grand a year.
But
In
like,
North Carolina,
Yeah.
yeah.
They've been working for like 30 something years.
but that's
if
what I'm saying.
You're
So like,
taking the highest.
imagine.
here.
So say that these rates, well, not the rates, but say like the highest pay, like it's not up to date. So
Yeah.
imagine like the government input to how much money you're getting is that much greater. When maybe when they started it, teachers were making 30, but maybe now they're making.
They're
50.
not. That's why I was saying like the older teachers made out pretty
Right.
good on that, but
Mhm.
like the new.
Because once the rates, it's hard to adjust those rates. So those older teachers who may have started out at like the high 30s as their annual income, well, if they've spent 30 years of service and at the end of those 30 years they're making in the low 50s, that's what you apply the rate to.
Let me see the title.
Okay. These are just, I'm not sure if these numbers are actual salaries that somebody would actually make, or they're just showing you how to do
So-
An
it.
example, yeah.
So would you say that, you know, the town mayor,
Mm-hmm.
would that be considered in this category?
I don't know if they would be under that, or do you think local government?
Yeah.
Don't you think local government is where they would fit?
So this is just state, okay,
Mhm.
a state governor.
I think because when I think of state, like imagine like a lot of the stuff that you would normally think, like our governor, they give him a house, so he doesn't have to pay for a house. He doesn't have to pay any of that stuff. Like you have stipends, so this would be your base salary on top of getting the rest of that free. So
Right, so these might just
those
be
might be
relative
still a
numbers.
little
I would
low,
look that up.
but like if you think of it in terms of that, and then that's also part of the problem. If if we're predicting like this is the low, but again the economy is not a stable venture, and all of a sudden we have a burst in increase in salaries, then this fixed rate hurts the government.
Right. And I'm not showing you this so we can figure out how much employee A makes. I'm showing you this so that we can figure out how much employee A is going to get for pension and what they're looking at as far as retirement. Are you going to be able to live off of that? How it varies from what you're living off of now, and things of that sort, and how the government actually calculates these things. So for if you're falling into this category, they're going to take your highest paid year. So again, that's probably going to be your latter years because they're going to pay you more with experience. And they're going to multiply it by this rate, and then you're going to multiply it by your years of service. Again, years of service is really big. That's how they determine things. And you're going to divide by 12 because this is going to be a yearly amount, but then we're looking at a monthly amount. Okay. So.
Okay.
So that percentage is much higher than the last one. Last
Yeah.
one.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so if we look at it as a percentage of their salary instead of just like what their salary is.
So you could look at so it'll hurt and help you at different times. So like Connecticut, I know they have a lower rate than the 1.82. So once you hit inflation with those salaries, Connecticut won't be hurt as bad as North Carolina because now North Carolina has to shell out more.
So what happens if like my mom, like probably 10 years ago, she actually made more than she does right now. Like I don't know why, I guess things changed and she made more. So would they still take your
Yeah.
highest?
Because they take the high, either like the second example showed they took the highest and the first example showed they took the 3 highest, but it's always going to be your highest year salary.
So it wouldn't just be your last year, like
No.
for the public.
Right. So under what circumstance that they take the last year's pay as the base to calculate? I remember I read it in the article. They take the last year's pay, right?
Was it certain
Right.
states?
It varies. I don't think there's any like determining factor. I didn't read about a determining factor, but I know Connecticut takes the last year, your last year of service, and that would be that because in Connecticut your last year of service is your highest year, your highest salary. But I would assume that in states where your highest year isn't where your last year isn't necessarily your highest, that they would take the 3 highest from wherever.
So what do you think would happen if you spent like 20 years doing a teacher and then you changed jobs and you did something else for the next 20 years? Would you get both?
That's actually okay. So my mom, she worked in Connecticut, and when she got hired at the corrections facility, it was a flat rate of 20 years. That has now increased to a flat rate of 25 years. But she was grandfathered in at 20 years. So she can retire at the end of this year, and she'll be 53. So she will get a pension from the state of Connecticut. Well, she is actually moving down to Charlotte when she leaves, and she plans on working for North Carolina government. And if she works for the North Carolina government for however long their flat rate is, then she can also get their.
So California is actually in our chapter. That's the one that they talk about the final year of service or your last year of work. That's where they talk about. You can find that on page 158. That's where they talk about. That's what they base it off of. California does that.
But that's not necessarily like the last year is. That's not necessarily for everybody.
Maybe you can answer this. I don't know how it is in the U.S. But so my dad worked for the Canadian government, and when he quit his job to move down here, they actually gave him his retirement fund. But the rule is that he can't. Basically, he had to put it into his own investment thing, and he can't access it till he's 55. But it's his to control. Like it's in a bank account. He just can't get it.
That
I don't know if they do that because so the Canadian government had to pay him his whole retirement, retirement fund, even though
That sounds like because when he started working for the Canadian government, like it was based on the pension plan is based on the assumption that you're not like you're putting in however many years of service and that's when you're going to collect the money. If you had people retiring early and then collecting the money early, they're not ready. Like they're not ready. They're not.
well, and so he didn't like. Technically, he retired early. Like he can't get the money, but they gave the money already.
I would assume, here in the U.S., well, just because we've been looking at North Carolina and other places where they base your stuff off of your years of service, I would assume that just say you work somewhere and then you do quit it. Well, first of all, your years of service is not going to be that much, and they have a tax penalty unless you fall under that category in the law that he just signed. They have a tax penalty for you like withdrawing. So I would assume that even that either they wouldn't let you do that or like you would be penalized anyway.
That like
I'm not
with my
sure.
mom, if she didn't put in the 20 years of service, she would be penalized. Like however
She'd
much
still get money. She would
still get money because she had contributed and she would probably get a portion as to what they were supposed to, but it wouldn't be the full benefits because she didn't fulfill the
So
requirements.
Sarah, is what your dad had is a pension plan or is different kind of plan? Because that makes a difference.
Yeah.
Because for example, I worked in Michigan for 1 year, and they contribute to my retirement account, and I work here. I was able to take that away, but I cannot access to it until I'm 55.
Yeah.
So the money remains there and keep being invested, but it's not a pension. It's just a fixed amount of money keep being invested in certain portfolio. So by the 55, whatever that becomes, and that's money I can withdraw. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I don't know whether your dad has a similar
Yeah.
kind of thing.
And I don't know because
Yeah.
he just calls it his pension, his Canadian pension. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think it's similar to what I had.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, that makes more sense. We're just gonna go for that.
Okay, so I also kind of have an example. My mom worked for the Hartford Insurance Company in Connecticut, and she worked there for like I don't know, a long time. And when we moved down here, like last year, she was given the opportunity to either liquidate the whole pension or wait another 10 years until she was 55, and she would get the entire amount. But because of financial stuff, she chose to like liquidate the whole thing. But like she had a tax penalty, and then she had to like save, I think it was like 10% of it or something. And
So yeah,
she couldn't use like that 10%.
I don't know how long she worked for, but I would assume that like the 10 years, like because I would assume that they have like a base, and so she left 10 years early. So they're saying, all right, well you can wait the 10 years so that you fulfill the amount of time that we agreed upon, or you can take it all now and you'll just get taxed and you'll have to save some and you won't necessarily get all of it that you were promised. But that's their way of like, we need more time. Like
Okay.
that's the
And
basis.
with that, we're going to start with our questions. So, for question 1, if there is no government or company-provided pension system, how can an individual create a financially safe retirement? So, if you don't have somebody backing you or your company, the people that you work for, they're not going to set up anything for you, what are you going to do? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I don't know your name right off the top. Yes. Jada. Got you, Jada.
I would say that individual could invest their money into like, I guess the stock market if they wanted to, or they could save money.
What if the stock market crashes?
Well, then they're out of luck.
I'm gonna say the same thing. They could just basically take out a set amount from each paycheck and just save.
Just set it aside.
Yeah, it's like why would you depend on somebody else?
Right.
Kristen?
I know like a lot of banks, I know my parents did this, like every paycheck they can tell them to put X amount into a different account, like their retirement account, and it builds up interest over time.
Okay.
I would save every month and then make sure my kids went to college and got a good job.
How do you know what to save? How do you know if your kids are gonna, take care of you?
Save a certain percentage every month.
And when you say take care of you, do you mean just put you in a rest home, or do you mean? I'm sorry, they're just all questions that
Me
I'm
and my mom
thinking.
have a stipulation, no rest home. She said, I had 3 children, so you can all pull your money together and get me a live-in nurse. So,
I'm
like,
gonna throw out a question while you're answering this question. People always look for immediate gratification.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have this system here. Okay, you say I'm going to save each month, but the question is, are you really going to do it? Who is going to make you to do this?
Anthony?
Well, you could get a CD like at the bank where you cannot touch it, like
that's
even
what
if you wanted to.
Oh yeah.
Like a bond.
Well, you can, just there's a lot of
A lot
bad
of
things that happen.
with it that you gotta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I had the CD before when if you touch it, you just do not get interest.
Mhm.
But the
Yeah.
principal will not decrease.
Yeah, that's the point of like the whole thing though, is that you want the interest off of it. So like,
And I don't know a lot
Yeah, that's
about banking, but I do know about the credit union, and like with them, your money draws interest too. So if you leave it in there, they're using it and drawing interest off of it.
1%.
When I turned 18, I was a primary beneficiary to a really large insurance policy, but I chose not to like touch it for like retirement purposes and stuff like that. And what I did was I found a man who like took me a really long time to get used to him because he's really controlling. But he is actually like a corporate guy for BB&T who like helps me manage it, and you pay out a certain percent when you first hire him. And he put my money in Amerifunds, which is a stock market. Now he watches it, so if the stock market crashes, he is supposed to pull my money out so that I don't lose it.
So that's his job.
That's his job. So that's what I was going to tell you about, like, people who invest. You usually have someone, or you want to have someone, unless you're really good at stock market, that will help you out. Like, I have to trust him because he could lose everything I had,
Yeah.
and then I'd be really upset.
But even still, even if he invested and something does go bad, then he's still losing everything. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So it's just no really safe way, I guess.
So yeah,
And you're
like,
next.
We got you, Kathleen.
You're next.
So I mean, like you could choose to do like the higher risk investments, go along the lines of, actually in the stock market and such. But there's also like, lower risk ways that don't pay out quite as high. But if you like spread it out over a period of time and get like, multiple venues that are lower risk, then you could end up, a similar amount.
Yeah.
That could also be it's just gonna take longer.
Right.
I personally agree with what he said about the CD because if you do it, if there's a way to set it up, I don't know if there is, not probably is by now. But like with your bank will like automatically take it out and put it in that CD if you're financially stable enough to do that, and you don't touch that CD. After a while, all that adds up after a while. But even if you have to do it yourself, if you do it religiously each time you get a paycheck,
Yeah.
in the end you'll end up with a pretty good amount of money to live off of for the rest of your life.
Well, that's like, okay, so my source for this is actually my mother. She's coming here to teach financial literacy. And so I had 2 routes. Like, one route would be systematic withdrawals. And with systematic withdrawals, you set up an investment account with a bank. And so you put a set amount of money into the investment account and it'll create interest. And then you can't touch it for a certain amount of years. And then at the end of those certain amount of years, they'll give you a certain amount each month. And the certain amount each month would be like, you would figure that out in the beginning. And then the second one would be just, I think I said savings
account.
Savings accounts. So savings accounts, again, like you have to put a set amount in the account. But the thing is with that, I think you can touch it. You can touch it. You shouldn't touch it.
Right.
Like, I would advise, like, if you have a systematic withdrawals plan and then a bunch of savings accounts, like maybe this savings account's gonna be for retirement, do not touch this savings account, you can touch, like, you just have to be diligent.
Okay, so we're not with the risky business, but we gotta move on. So question 2. We will get all of you guys that haven't spoken. We'll make sure you get that correct. So, question 2. Why would a state or local government ever commit more resources for future pension benefits than it could possibly have resources to pay? So we talked about that. Like, why are you going to say you can and you can't? Kathleen?
It's more of a idea of I really, really hope to be able to give you all this, like, because we like to assume that everything's going to get better and our economy is going to be awesome and you'll be able to pay it. You'll be able to pay it. But that, like we've been saying, it doesn't always work because of the way the system fluctuates. By the time it's time for, say, you or I to retire, we could be in a recession or something. And then that screws the whole idea of being able to pay it off.
And that's my thing too. We know that the economy is crazy, so why do we do it? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
I think it has a lot to do with politics. So like in the state and local governments, when they're getting elected, they will make promises that they can't keep sometimes, and this will be one of them. Like they'll add benefits to help increase their votes.
Mm-hmm.
And also I think that with the bankruptcy code that it said in chapter 9, it makes it extremely easy for the governments to renegotiate, so they're not really losing anything big.
And that's what I think too. I think about, in elementary school, you had your class president or whatever running saying that they would have better cafeteria food, but why do we have healthy cafeteria food? It sucks. Yes, ma'am.
I think it might be a lot because there's not so much risk on the companies to promise all these things.
That's true.
So when it doesn't come through, they get a bailout or you're screwed.
Right. But what happens when people don't want to work for you anymore?
Well, that's what I was about to say. No one would want to work for them if they didn't promise this stuff. And that's why a lot of people in here are for education. I hold on to this hoping thing that education will improve by the time I retire. But I mean, they have to do it or no one would work for them. No one would want to be a police officer.
No one would work for them, but then you also have to compete because if one company is offering hey, we got some great lifetime benefits over here, and you're over here just we'll give you a stipend. That's what we have to offer. No one's going to choose you over the other company.
Right, so you want to be competitive.
I just think it's the case wouldn't really be that no one would work for them because you can always find somebody to work for you. We just might end up with lower quality employees.
Right, and do we want that?
But then you get lower quality,
There's still
output.
not even that risk there,
right?
Because you will always find employees.
And if we do get lower quality employees, then I feel like we'd have lower quality products. So your stuff's not selling anyway. So for question 3. Why do you suppose that many state and local governments have been calculating future funding of promised pension benefits using an assumed 8% rate of return? Why not use 2% or even 0%? Yes, ma'am.
So we're talking about what they expect their investments they expect what you're putting into growth.
So
right?
in terms of a private company, when they decide pension plans, they say, okay, we put this much money in our investments. We're expecting an 8% rate of return,
So
and that decides,
that
decides therefore how much they put into the pension.
I think it's all of the reasons for the second question, but it's also wishful thinking. We do the same thing. We say, okay, we're gonna put this money aside, and it's gonna grow, and by the time we get to retirement, we're gonna have this great big thing. And it's not we need to have,
Devil's advocate.
But why not grow it
we
at
need to have
2%?
put more in, realistic expectations and not instant gratification. We put sacrifice now so that we can have more then, because it really isn't, whether we do it or the government does it or the private sector does it, it just doesn't we realize that we have too unrealistic expectations.
Right. Yes, sir.
So 2%, when you get so low, when you're 2%, 0%, you're not getting the benefit. you're getting the instant gratification, kind of like, okay, I don't have to put that much money away. The banks don't have to pay, the companies don't have to pay you that much more for you to put away. So sure, you've got the instant gratification, but eventually you're gonna have to retire. And you need 8%. I don't know specifically how they found, 8, but like rather than 2 or 0, like there's gotta be some funds in there for you to be able to go
And that's
through
what we
it.
said too, yes sir.
That, and as a consumer that's gonna be putting their money into it, it's not as appealing to hear that the company's gonna make 2%. As in, if you see they're gonna make 8% back, then you think you might have some money. But if you see they're making no profit, like off of that money, you're not gonna be compelled to give it to.
Well, because like the 8% rate of return is like, that includes how much they're getting for themselves, and then they have to go and take some out of what they're getting from themselves to you. So
I can give you some explanation for that 8%. That actually is calculated, 8%.
Okay.
Based on the performance of the stock market, bond market, all this capital market, they calculate, and by using very sophisticated model to calculate 8%. Because I have a retirement account, I contribute some each year, my school contributes some. And the money was invested in the portfolio with mutual fund, the stock, but majority of the stock, okay? And I've been working here, this is my 8th year, I've been working here for 7 years, okay? So every year we contribute to that money, right? And every year accrue some, returns. So last time I look at it, I look at all the principles and look at, the returns. And when I do this rate of return calculation, it is exactly 8% annual. So this 8% is not come from nowhere. It's come from very sophisticated mathematical model. They calculated if based on the performance of the stock market and capital market, and that's what is your estimated rate of return.
So that's like the equilibrium for which
yes, that's right, in the capital market.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
So what if the stock market was like really good all the time? They would have it like at a higher rate?
Yes, if it's really good, it's gonna have higher. If it's really bad, it's gonna. But here we're talking about on average. Let's say 30 years. After 30 years, you have experienced the up and down. Then you calculate average. It's gonna be very close to 8%. Yeah.
So the problem is when the stock market crashes and
Yeah.
then
If
it
you
wouldn't be 8%.
That's right. But if you're gonna let's say some people retired 2009, 2010, they're very in trouble, right? Because their portfolio had the value of this is going down. Yes, but if you bought if the time you retirement is when it's booming, then yes, it's gonna be greater.
I have a question. Like, say you're working in a job and like is your retirement age is coming up, like it's next year, but like you see like it's not doing well. Can you say I want to work for a couple more years and like keep on stuff?
You could do that, but I think the best strategy is you design your portfolio this way. When you're young and you have a lot of risky assets, then when you get older, it becomes safer and safer. That should how you design your portfolio. Yeah, so for example, right now I'm relatively young, so a lot of my money is going to the stocks. But when I approach to 50 or 60, I'm going to have a lot of bond investment. You see, so that's how should you design your portfolio. As time goes, you should change the risk. Yeah.
So that kind of ties into we kind of jumped around, but question 5 says so the economic climate since 2008 it's caused a lot of people to prolong working and just defer their retirements. So what effect do you think that has on the larger employers in the state and local governments? Like,
I mean, these employers still have to keep paying those funds. They have to keep paying, and it eventually it builds up. So when most of these people are going to stop working, they've set aside enough money for them to stop working until right there. So then they've got the money that they actually have the money to give, and then they're like, well, the economy's bad, so we're going to keep working, and they don't have that money.
Right.
That, and as you said, I think it was the first or the second slide of this, that if you retire younger, you get longer benefits, but they aren't as much. But whenever the people work longer than they're supposed to, the benefits get bigger and the companies can't pay that.
Good job, quite the parable.
So I was wondering whether because you're both saying it would be worse for the people to work longer, but wouldn't it be better because at least they're doing some work for the company, and then they're gonna collect retirement benefits for shorter. I mean, assuming they're gonna live the same amount of time, they're gonna collect retirement benefits for the time they're not working.
It's not worse
Or shorter.
for them, it's worse for the pension system. Like, just the system as a whole, them deferring retirement. Like, so, the people who are set to retire on a certain plan, your company or state, like, that's the plan and they need to provide those benefits, whether they should do or do not, but they're supposed to. The sooner you retire and we get paying you out the way, the sooner they can renegotiate to future pensions. So if you're prolonging your retirement and we're paying you and paying you and paying you, like, we're not feeling the benefits of renegotiation.
And at a certain age and certain like year of service, can't you like start drawing from like your retirement fund and the Social Security? So wouldn't that be like getting 2 checks? Is that right?
2 checks.
Double it.
Right.
But can't they renegotiate for people they're hiring, even though they're people that are about to retire? They can't negotiate.
No,
You mean like rewrite their laws as far as like retirement goes, like
Oh,
do
I'm
different
talking more
plans?
like private.
No, like private. So she's asking like,
Yeah, that's
even
what
if
I'm saying.
even if people are prolonging retirement, can't they still renegotiate for the future?
New hires.
Yeah. So, but
So what are you saying? You want the younger people to have less? Because that's us.
Well,
no, they will.
Need to have less.
This is the way it is. Like they
They're
will.
gonna have less.
But I said like if
I don't understand what y'all are saying. Are you saying that to renegotiate retirement talk to like the people that you're about to hire? So just say like you're about to hire me. Are you telling me that okay, I can't afford like I've already got people that I had to pay for, so I can't afford to give you as much?
Well, I just don't understand why I'm just not getting why it's good for them to retire like early.
because on top of so they have to pay these employees a certain amount of pension plan, and then they're gonna go and hire new people and renegotiate. Well, if they're paying you to work on top of paying your pension plan, they're not gonna be able to hire as many new
Yeah, okay,
workers
yeah, I do
to renegotiate
Yeah.
those plans.
And when you say retire early, what do you mean? Are you talking about as far as their age or as far as the years of service?
Well, I'm
they
talking
put
about if
in?
they were retiring like the age that they should have. Where we were talking about how they would retire later. So I'm talking about retiring on time.
Yeah, basically. If they don't retire in time, it hurts the company.
Yeah.
All right.
I was just not understanding why it would hurt the company for them to retire later.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I still completely grasp it.
Jada?
I'm with her. I don't understand why it hurts the company. Man, like I do, but I don't. Like, if you have somebody working in that spot, you're not gonna be hiring someone for that spot, right?
So if you have someone working, so say someone who's past the retirement age, but they're still working, I need to pay them to work. And so if they're working past the retirement age, chances are they're at a higher salary. So they're at a higher salary, we're paying you to work, and then we're still contributing to your pension plan at the rate that we agreed upon, plus we still are going to have to pay you after you retire.
Right.
That eliminates the possibility for hiring younger people at a younger base salary, renegotiating pension plans, and so that hurts the company.
And the years that you work is a part of that equation. So just say employee A works for the same amount of money for 20 years, they're going to get less than what employee B does for the same amount for 30 years.
Okay.
So what you're saying is if people don't retire when they're supposed to and they work longer than their retirement, then that hurts new hires and the younger people.
It hurts the employer.
Yes.
Employer.
It hurts the employer.
So we need grandma to go home.
But wouldn't it not it wouldn't really affect the large employers as much though, right?
They're the ones paying it out.
Oh, well, whatever. Because I don't know.
Yeah, because basically what you're saying is like with the older they are, the more you have to keep paying them. So
Basically.
if you cut them loose, let them go, then you've got the youngers, and you can negotiate their pension
Right.
at
And that's-
lower.
right.
That way you don't have
There's
to.
been a lot of with a lot of people, like you'll notice, like people who have put in like diligent years of service and been loyal to their companies.
Correct.
Companies have been like, we'll demote you, or we decrease your benefits, or
we chop you to part time.
exactly chop you to part time, because it's more economical for them to do that and hire the newbie who's 20 and fresh out of college than to
You have to
keep
think
your-
about maximum profit, and when you are just out of school, you don't have the experience, so you are going to be paid less than somebody doing the same thing as you, but somebody that's been working there. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So yeah. So we skipped question 4. So why can't state and local governments simply continue to borrow funds through the bond market to cover not only shortfalls in current tax revenues, but also shortfalls in future available funding to pay contractual pension benefits? So why can't we just keep getting money?
Well, first, before we do that, like, how many of you like know what the bond market is? Okay.
You want to
Blaine,
explain?
can you explain?
Try. But like basically bonds, like I guess the easiest way to explain it is like war bonds, kind of. So like when the military or when we would get into a war, you can buy war bonds. So like, which are basically like, we'll set a set price, like a $10 war bond, okay, and that money would go back, but then it would end up coming back to you.
Yeah.
So it's like helping immediately whatever the bond is for.
Yes.
But then eventually it comes back.
It's basically a system where you pay for it, and someone out there is using that money, and they are the ones who owe you.
Right.
Yeah, like it started as like the government's way of trying to borrow from
people,
like the people,
Yeah.
like the population. Like in World
So
War
like
II.
basically,
That's how they.
I was about to say that.
So like basically bonds are like you're investing your money into the government and like government stuff. But where stocks is like you're investing your money in companies who are like kinda iffy. You gotta
Yeah, they could be kind of, yeah. Okay, so with that definition, like, how do you answer that question?
So why can't they just continue to borrow money? All the way in the back.
Because it would have a negative impact on the economy. Investment in the economy would go down, which could result in a recession.
That, and whenever they have to pay the money back, then it could cause inflation. If, like, they give it back and then the money wouldn't be worth anything that they give.
Right.
And eventually bonds, if you're buying bonds, someone's having to pay them back and everyone's buying bonds, eventually there are no more bonds. There's no money being paid back in transaction. And so with that being said, then it's not, there's no money to cover any of that.
So, the question, so why don't they continue to use the bond market over right now, say private companies are using investments? But bond markets, like investments, are reliant on the state of the economy. So if the bond market doesn't create enough revenue to even initially help you out, there's no point in even borrowing.
Because there's no money circulating.
Exactly. And then the second part of that is, what was that? Oh, on top of not getting enough money for that, you're being taxed on it because you're borrowing from someone and they get it at interest. So you're not getting enough revenue from that, but you're being taxed on it. So it's just, it doesn't help you.
Right, okay. And so for our last question of the day, because we're running out of time, in the private sector, 1 in 5 workers have been promised lifetime pensions, whereas in the public sector, 4 in 5 have been made the same promise. So here we go with the compare and contrast thing again. Why does the private sector offer so few as opposed to the public? Sierra.
I feel like a private sector, there's less people in the company, and it's more of like, it's like a closer knit company. In the public sector, it's more like a broad spectrum where there's lots of different levels in the company.
And also with public sectors, it's the taxpayers that are paying it rather than, the private sector looks for aid. So the more people are getting paid in the public sector because it's all of us paying for each other.
Right. And that's a constant source.
Right.
For us too, yeah. Anthony?
That's exactly what I was about to say. It's okay.
Could it be also because the private sector a lot of times has more lucrative salaries, and so people are able to pay for their own pensions, whereas the public sector, they need
That is, I didn't think about that.
I didn't think
That's
about
a good
that
point.
either. So they're probably putting away their money anyway.
Right.
If
Yeah.
they're-
Right.
And
Leg-
public sector needs to attract workers, and they do that by offering, you know, pensions.
Look at you.
I like that.
Okay. Do we have any more thoughts on pension? Any more thoughts on pension?
I think we need to give applause for today's discussion. I thought it's, you know, it's a fantastic.
I had said, like, this is one chapter that I had initially just skimmed over, but reading it, I was really interested in it, because I don't think about this, but it's really important.
But we are getting old.
Okay, so on Thursday, we're going to talk about
Oh, you
similar
got a question
topic.
for her?
Somebody already volunteered, right? So you guys going to do it, all right?
Sorry.
Okay, so what else? I want you to continue thinking about the topics for the final paper. Okay, remember, you know, at the beginning of November, you need to talk to me about the topic. Okay?
Do you want us to,
When do you want us to meet?
just talk to you about
Yeah, talk to me about the
just
topic.
come to your office hours or something? Because I know I already have my.
Or set up a meeting?
Yeah, set up the meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so just